Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Railway Gazette interactive live broadcast entitled Don't Forget the Present. This afternoon, we're going to be looking at how cybersecurity can be enhanced on legacy rail systems. I'm Nick Kingsley, I'm the executive editor of the Railway Gazette Group, and it's my pleasure to be chairing this afternoon's discussion, which is sponsored by the specialist technology company, Cylus. It's easy to assume that rail cybersecurity is only a problem for brand new railways and is only to be focused on at the procurement stage. We sometimes ignore the fact that existing trains, infrastructure and other assets were probably not built with this type of security in mind. But right now, rail operations around the world are running insecure protocols being managed by Windows XP machines and are powered by devices that are subject to critical vulnerabilities. This situation is risky and there's a need for immediate action. Today's broadcast will focus on offering practical tips on securing your existing systems, railway assets, infrastructure and rolling stock. During the broadcast, we'll tackle some key questions, which include how to start your efforts in securing your installed base of equipment, how to improve your safety and security without making costly changes to your operations or infrastructure, and what the TS 50701 standard is telling us about securing this installed base. To explore the topic in depth, I'm delighted to welcome our panelists this afternoon. We have Anaïs Trouard, Implementation Change Leader at the Belgian National Railway Infrastructure Manager, Infrabel. George Bearfield, Rail Safety Risk and Assurance Executive at the rolling stock leasing company Rock Rail. And Nicolas Goupil, Director of Technical Solutions at Cylus, who are sponsoring today's discussion. So we've already received quite a number of questions in the feed ahead of today's broadcast, but I would like to remind everyone, and those of you who've seen one of our Railway Gazette interactive live broadcasts before will know this, please get your questions in using the field in front of you on the screen underneath the video feed. It's a really important and successful part of the format, so please do get your questions in as we go through, and I'll be coming to the ones that are moderating and passed through to me as we go through the discussion, so it really can be truly interactive. But to start things off, and before we get a proper introduction of our panelists, I'm going to come to Nicolas, who's going to start the discussion with a short presentation on behalf of Cylus. So Nico, over to you.
Thanks, Nick. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today and my fellow panelists. So I think Nick has already introduced the topic a little bit, and I will go today through a short presentation to start, putting some things in mind of what we are suggesting and what the standards are suggesting actually of what can be done to secure existing railway systems. So without further ado, let's get started. So just a very quick introduction. So my name is Nicolas Goupil. I'm a Director of Technical Solutions at Cylus. I have about 20 years experience on mostly railway systems, in system engineering, telecom, cybersecurity, both in engineering functions and product management functions. I worked at global integrators as well as global vendors, and I now especially focus on the cybersecurity aspect of those systems. So we will get a little bit closer look at what, why do we say that actually systems are vulnerable, and that's not that might be obvious to certain, but might be not obvious to everybody. So I think it's important to remind ourselves why we're here today. We will look at what is it we cannot do, because unfortunately we cannot do everything and anything we would like to do. That would be nice, but it's not real life, right? But thankfully, there are things we can do to address those challenges, and we'll go through some of those real quick and some key takeaways before we get into the question and answers with our fellow panelists. So let's really get started. So yeah, rail systems, right? So whatever is running today out there, be it a train, a signaling system, has been designed, I don't know, 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, long time ago. So just we can ask ourselves, 30 years ago, why cybersecurity topic? If you were a government working in defense, maybe. If you were a railway supplier, probably not, or even train operators. So mostly all the systems that you have running out there today, which have been designed a long time ago, let's face it, cybersecurity was definitely not a topic back then when they were designed. So it's probably safe to assume that if it was not a topic, then it was not a consideration, then it's just not. Let's also not forget that the railway is a world which is driven very much by standards and norms. So here also we can think about, okay, cybersecurity in norms and standards in railway, when did that start appearing? Yeah, well, not so long ago. So basically, the system we have today have not been designed with security in mind, because just it was not a thing back then. So it's digging a bit into that topic. I mean, it's important to recognize that safety is not security. And the latest iteration of the 5129, the standard EN standard for safety, which was published in 2018. This is the first time that actually cybersecurity was mentioned in the standard, and saying clearly that one equal not the other. That most likely system which are safe, so they were designed and safe and certified and all of that, were not done so with the cybersecurity in mind. So, and cybersecurity also could actually cause not just problem into operation, but also safety, could have safety impact. So very important to recognize that. And the way the standard actually deal with this, it does recommend that it's more than a recommendation. So you have to do some risk assessment, basically, of the system which are certified and they're part of your safety case. So it's actually now a mandatory part of any safety certification. But yes, this standard only came up in 2018. So before that, well, yes, you get what you specify, basically. So if you had a clear view and you already were concerned about cybersecurity and you had specified things in your tenders when you were procuring trains or signaling system or any control command systems, then great. However, if you did not, well, then yeah, it's just not there. And the third thing as well is to recall again, it's also a link to safety is not security, is that you do a safety case on a train, you don't touch anything, you're good for the next 20 years. It's safe. Cybersecurity doesn't work like that, unfortunately, at all. It's a very dynamic environment. You have the CVEs, for example, so critical vulnerabilities are found out on equipment all the time. Hackers, the bad guys found new ways of getting in. So this is a very dynamic environment, which is not very friendly with a rail environment where we like to have things, neat and tidy and not changing over time. So just some practical, real life example of the sort of things that are really challenging on cybersecurity for existing system. So, for example, let's talk about encryption, right? I mean, all the and I'm talking about legacy systems here mostly. So encryption was not a thing back then. So none of those good stuff is present in the system. When some systems have introduced it, but they are outdated. This is something we'll encounter a lot, because encryption, okay, being a cybersecurity technical measure, is evolving over time. And remember, rail systems are delivered and probably won't change over time. So how would you keep your encryption mechanism up to date over 20, 30 years? Very tough. We have to do that. And as an industry, we are trying to come up with a way to cope with those changes. So, I mean, one of the fashionable words that you are allowed to is crypto agility, for example. So having products which can have the algorithm that are used for encryption upgraded over time. But first of all products don't do that. And secondly, how does that impact your operational and the safety of your system if you are going to change protocols within your system over the life of the system? So that's a tough one. Equipments which have critical CVEs. So CVEs are critical vulnerabilities. So there's a body that is referencing that. So there's a public list of vulnerabilities which can be linked to operating system, to software, can be also linked to some hardware sometimes. And basically, this is telling you that yes, there are ways to abuse those equipments if you do this or that. Now, good practice in IT systems is obviously to patch and keep your system up to date, but that's very tough. That's very difficult to do on a railway again, because You have an operational system that is running 24/7, that has been safety certified with a certain behavior. You're changing bits of the system. What's the impact, etc., etc. So very difficult things to do overall. Another thing you will find is that flat systems, so flat networks. So on all the systems, basically it's a free for all. I mean, you will have everybody in the same zone, and that's a very dangerous thing, because if one thing gets compromised, then basically you have no way to mitigate this event, because everybody is on the same network. So that's really something that is not easy to handle. And yes, you might have some perimeter control, so maybe some firewalls between systems. That could be, but you will find very often that they are very permissive. So they might be there, but they will probably not be blocking as much as you would like them to be blocking. You will find also insecure use of insecure protocols by nature. So I just listed here a couple of examples. So Telnet versus SSH, for example, or SNMPv1 versus SNMPv3. So the inherent use of protocols which are not secure. And then you're blind, which really doesn't help. So you have no idea what's going on in there. So, if somebody is there, is it exploited? Is it not exploited? Usually a cyber attack is, there's a kill chain that can be quite long. You have lateral movement, etc. So if you're lucky, you have some time to catch somebody trying to do something nasty in there. But if you have no visibility inside your network, how you're gonna catch this bad actor who is trying to move around your network to maybe commit, some sabotage or whatever. So that's really something that is hard. So this is a long list that is actually not the complete list, but just to illustrate the sort of things that we are facing when defending legacy existing railway networks. So we live in the real world, so there are things we cannot do, So we cannot re-architect the control command systems. We can't rip everything out and put something that's been designed with security in mind, according to the latest 62443 standards, be it for the development life cycle, for the technical countermeasures. That's great, and that's hopefully what we are doing now when procuring new system. But we are left with the old system, so we're not gonna replace them just because of cybersecurity. Most likely, it's expensive, complex, and time consuming. So that we cannot do, right? The second things, I mean, if you listen to cybersecurity in general and in IT, I mean, at the moment, one of the best practice is to have some kind of protection down to the end device, security agents, stuff like that. Now in OT and in railway in particular, this is very difficult, because you cannot just add any piece of software to any piece of command control system that you have out there. I don't think first you might impact the safety case, because this by design, these agents will interact with the system that is running in it. So how is that playing with your certification? Well, it probably voids it. And probably vendors of those systems will probably also not happy, because they cannot guarantee what will be the impact of installing those kind of agents on your rail equipment. And the third thing is that something we've touched on slightly before. So yes, good practice from IT again, patch systems on a regular basis. Yeah. Well, yeah, we have constraints here also, similarly to the the security agent. We cannot patch willy-nilly rail systems, because first they might not have patched anyway. So there's a lot of bespoke products from the industry, which again have been designed 20 years. And mostly the vendor is not around anymore anyway. It's not under warranty, so you're not going to get a patch from your vendors for those equipments. And then if you get a patch, you still need to validate it, and again, if it's on a safety critical systems, there's a number of things to do. So it's a very time consuming also and expensive. So you can't just go on a weekly basis, go around and patch all my systems. So that's also not an option. And this is something that is being discussed a lot in the industry, how do we handle patching systems? But there's not really a consensus out there, I would say. So okay, so I mean, so far you're going to tell me that's not very positive, right? I mean, I've just told you all the bad stuff that can happen, and then how we cannot fix it by doing that. Well, yes, it's not all gray and it's not doom and gloom. Yes, things you can do really to help your system and to drastically really improve your security posture with a very having a non-intrusive approach, obviously, because as you've probably gathered by now, I mean, we have to be quite hands-off on the system we are trying to protect. And there are things that you can do that will help you to do that. So one of the first thing you should do really is around your asset inventory. So, it might be obvious, it might not be, but you can't protect what you don't know. As we said earlier on before, if you have no visibility inside your network, how you're going to know if there's anything happening there. So this is obviously has to be done in a non-intrusive way. So you will not impact your system. So that's nice. And the way to go about that is basically you will find in your organization a lot of different sources for asset information. So you might have system documents, system drawings. You might have some CMDB system running already. So asset management might be a discipline if you're lucky that you have in your organization already that might have some of that. You probably will also have to go and interview experts, in the system, so they can tell you actually what is running out there, and also visual inspection. So this is also something that you might have to do to gather as much information as possible from all of the assets that you might have. And then you have tools out there that help you to do that. So obviously they have to be completely non-intrusive. You cannot going and pulling equipment randomly, especially when you don't know what's out there, is a very dangerous thing. So that's definitely not something I would recommend. And for some systems, even just a PCAP, so a network capture of the traffic in the right places, is enough basically to validate what you might have compiled as assets and discover the extra bits, and then reconcile the overall. And then you have built basically that's one source of asset truth for cybersecurity purpose, which is great, but should not be a one-off activity. This has to be kept up to date, because you will need that all along the life cycle of your systems. So you have to have a way to basically automate the update of that list, so it's not an Excel spreadsheet, gathering dust in the corner, and the next time it's used is when you have a problem. So that's one thing you can do, is building and maintaining that asset inventory, which is really a pillar of your cybersecurity for those systems. The next thing you can do is basically, now that you understand the system that you have, you can actually start segmenting a little bit, as much as you can, the existing system. Remember before I was just mentioning that networks are flat. You cannot mitigate, you have no control on traffic between various systems. You cannot mitigate problems. If you have a problem in one computer in that network, well, it's game over for the whole network. That's really bad. And all the standards anywhere, zone and conduits are good practice in 62443 and TS 5701. Therefore, so for legacy system, so existing system, you do as much as you can. So you have to be able to identify a system that can be managed like that. So you have to be able to put boundaries around them. You have to make sure that you are understanding the interface that you might have between those systems, so you can really isolate them as a system. Then you can run some security assessment around it. What are the attack vectors on those systems? What vulnerabilities they might have inside? And then once you have a picture of that, you can start building some defense in-depth protection for that new segment that you've just defined. So usually it's going to be mostly around perimeter protection. So either adding firewalls between that system and the other system, maybe data diode if they are more suitable. If there's data going only one way, there's various ways of doing perimeter protection. But try to get away as much as possible from flat networks. Do some segmentation. Again, it's not going to be perfect. You're dealing with legacy system. You're not doing a full-blown zone and conduit exercise as you would do for a greenfield project. But you will be able to start mitigating some of those risks that way. And then the third thing you should do once you have identified the assets, providing some segmentation and segregation where you could, with some maybe additional perimeter protection. Well, you don't want to stay blind, and you have also to maintain that asset list. So you have to monitor, as much as possible now those systems that you understand a bit better, which have some degree of protection. And there's various way of doing this. So first, you need to be, remember, non-intrusive and be able to capture the relevant traffic. So there's a variety of ways, and that goes, by the way, both for rolling stock and trackside infrastructure. What I'm talking about so far, it's really applicable across the board. So you have to capture traffic in the right location of those networks. So there's various technical ways you could do that, right? I mean, you could just add tap in those locations. You could use span ports from switches, RSPAN, so more sophisticated spanning of traffic remotely, or adding even a visibility layer such as packet brokers, where you can plug tools at the back of it to monitor performance, to monitor cybersecurity. So we are seeing a lot of that now happening in the railway, actually. And while this is already done, on the IT side, visibility has been there for a long time, and there's a whole market for it. In OT networks, this is still in its infancy, and it's definitely not mature. So we're starting to see things happening in that space, which is great, because visibility is really key, and that can be done non-intrusive, and especially for existing networks. And then you need to plug tool at the back of that monitoring infrastructure that will enable you to support that asset management. So really, it needs to give you, not just an IP address and a name. You want to know much more. You want to be able to see fingerprint, possibly the OS that are running on it. You want to understand the rail specific characteristics. So if it's an RBC, for example, from ERTMS, you might want to know phone numbers. There's protocol specific, metadata that are very relevant that you want to be able to capture in that list. Because then when you do your threat detection, which you can do now because you have a monitoring infrastructure in place and you're seeing what's going on, you need to be able to do it now, not just at the network level. Okay, it's great to be able to see somebody is doing a TCP sweep, or if there's somebody doing some ping onto your network. But what you want to do really is go up to the application layer and do deep packet inspection. So you need to have solutions basically that understand those kind of systems and those kind of protocols. So here I mentioned ETCS and CBTC kind of system. So you really need to go up to the application layer. Otherwise, you're not blind anymore, but you have only one eye with a very poor eyesight, and the other one is still blind. So that's better. You're going to tell me yes, but you can do much better, believe me. And out of all of that, as well, you want to be able to put in place actionable mitigation plans. So you're going to get alerts and stuff if you don't know what to do with it. And this is not the IT world. If your system detects some abnormal behavior on your ETCS protocol stack, if you give that to an IT engineer, I'm not sure he's going to be able to do much with it. So you need really, this is one of the challenge we have, right, is to linking the rail operation with the IT security operation and providing action plan and playbooks that can be used in those contexts. So it's important that the tools that you use basically are able to do those sort of things. And once you've done those three things, if you do those three things, I mean, you are really sitting in a much better position than before, because you know what you have, you see what's happening, you are able to react to what's happening, and you've provided some mitigation with segmentation of the system as much as you could. So that's already quite something. And all those activities have had very minimum impact on the actual operation and the functioning of those systems. You've been pretty much hands off, not impacting the way they work. So I'm not sure I clicked one time too many. So if we summarize a little bit what we just said, so basically, yeah, sure, your rail systems are not secure. They've been designed a long time ago when security was not a thing. There was no standard norms around it. Nobody to blame. It's just like that. But people really need to acknowledge that, because I do still see out there people who will say, yeah, but the old system, the new system will be secure, but the old one, it's the old one. Yeah, but the old one, is widely deployed and is going to be there for still some years. So it's, we need to really raise the awareness at this point. Then what can we do? Well, there are things we cannot do, unfortunately, which are aligned to modern cybersecurity practice. That you could look in the IT environment. Because it's an OT system and we have operational and safety constraints that you don't have in IT, and that prevent us to do things like added software agents to equipment, for example. However, there's still quite a few things you can do which are practical, pragmatic, and add a lot of value for your security, be it on the asset management, the visibility, and the segmentation of those existing networks. So I think, Nick, this was the 3 points I wanted to raise as an introduction to the panel, and up to you now. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nico. That was a really, really insightful way to start the discussion, and thank you for setting the scene and going into quite a lot of detail there. I think particularly, I think our viewers who are familiar perhaps with the IT side of cybersecurity will recognise a lot of the terminology and the language that you use there. So thank you very much for getting us going with that presentation. Just a reminder to everybody watching in the audience, do please feel free to fire any questions or queries. If you'd like Nico to explain anything in specific detail from his presentation, then please put a question in the feed and we can address it as we go. So moving on now to the Q&A with our panelists as well. I'm just going to turn to each of them in turn. So I'm going to come to Anaïs first. Anaïs, perhaps you could perhaps just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about what you do in your work with Infrabel, and perhaps give your reflections or any initial thoughts on Nico's presentation as well.
Yeah, right. Hello, everyone. So I'm Anaïs and I'm working at Infrabel since 3 years. I'm in the cybersecurity team since 6 months now. And I'm doing everything that has to do with the change management. So that includes communication, training, but also stakeholder engagement. More specifically, it's translating the NIS law and other norms into something that's understandable for employees. Yeah, furthermore, I think the introduction of Nicolas was very interesting, and it gave a very good picture of the challenge we're facing with the railway systems.
Great, thank you. And George, just again, feel free to introduce yourself, give us perhaps the perspective, tell us a bit about the work you do with Rockrail and perhaps your perspective on Nico's presentation as well.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. So yeah, my name's George Barefoot. I'm Director of Health, Safety and Cybersecurity at Rockrail. Rockrail is a relatively new entrant to the rolling stock leasing company market and has led over £3 billion now worth of investment in brand new rolling stock. I originally came on board doing system safety assurance, but as a risk management professional, very quickly came to the view that buying assets of this type over a 30-year life, one of the key related risks that we needed to be on top of was cybersecurity. So I've been kind of down a rabbit hole, gathering as much information as I can to ensure that Rockrail, working with the team there, is doing its best to ensure that its assets are not only demonstrably safe, but demonstrably cyber secure for the long term. So you might think, well, I'm probably at the wrong webinar then, because this is about legacy, and Rockrail hasn't got a lot of legacy. But the point I wanted to pick up on what Nicolas said in his very thorough presentation was the dynamic nature of this. So, even our fleets that have been in service now, operation now for 2 or 3 years, the pace of change is so much that we need to be educated as to how technology is evolving and planning proactively how we're going to ensure we working with the operators, maintainers, and design authority, how we are making sure that our rolling stock remains, best in class for the long term.
Fantastic, thank you, George, for that introduction. So let's just kick off then, perhaps with a couple of general questions, and perhaps touch on some of the things that we've heard in the presentation. Nicolas, perhaps I'll come back to you. Tell us a little bit more about the TS 50701 standard. You've mentioned it a couple of times. And are these standards global? Because I'm conscious that our audience today, is all around the world, not just in Europe or not just in North America. So just give us a sense by which cybersecurity in rail, are the standards emerging in Europe predominantly, and what is that, or are there global standards, and what are the differences if you're a railway in the UK or in Germany compared to somewhere like India, for example, where I know we have quite a lot of viewers of this broadcast?
Thank you, Nick, for the question. Very, very good question, because actually, as I did mention in my short presentation, there are standards, and we are an industry that is driven by standards, right? So unless there is a standard, we won't really do it. So the TS 5701 is a Senelec. It's not really a standard, first of all. But the important thing to know is that this is actually now in the ISA. This is being translated in ISA now to be an IEC standard. So there will be an IEC standard out of it. So IEC is properly global. So this will be really global. So the committee has been formed. The work has started. This is an IEC standard, so we're talking 2-3 years maybe, I guess, before this turns into an IEC standard. But this will turn into an IEC standard indeed. Will it be word for word as it is written today? I don't know, but the TS 5701 being itself actually based on the IEC 62443 suite of standards, it's all very closely related, so it won't be diverging much. And the important thing is that in that standard, which is very much applicable now for any new system you're designing, there is an Appendix B which deal with legacy systems, and they have some recommendation there on what should be done basically for legacy systems. And legacy system, I think, as Anaïs was hinting, it's about people, process, and technology. So we've been focusing a lot about technology, I guess, in my presentation, but process and people are equally important. So all the good stuff that Anaïs is doing about, raising awareness, training your people about cybersecurity is something very important that should be done for legacy system, most definitely, because this is something you can do. The other thing you should do, according to the standards for that, is also you should do quick is not the word, security assessment of those systems. That will not be thorough because you cannot do it the full scope as you would on a greenfield system. But out of that, you'll be able to derive things like I mentioned, additional perimeter protection to mitigate some of the threats. Monitoring is a strong recommendation as a technical countermeasure. Segregation of networks where you can. So all the things that we recommended basically in the presentation are recommendations that are also coming out of the TS 5701 essentially. So TS 5701 was driven in Europe clearly, but now this is probably the most advanced standard or set of recommendation we have out there anyway. So this is slowly being adopted a bit everywhere. North America being North America, there is TSA standard. It's a bit different, but let's not forget that all of those are closely related to the IEC 62443, which is international. So that's a bit the landscape for that.
Thank you, Nico. So essentially, there is a level of global kind of interaction, at least between the standards, even if you can't say definitively, there is a global standard yet. And it's clear that the standards, the landscape of defining standards is changing probably in the same way that the risk is changing. Yeah.
So the global standard will be the IEC one, which is pretty much TS 5701. So this is in a nutshell what it is.
Okay, thank you. I'll come back to Anaïs then to talk a little bit about the people side of things, the organizational culture facing railways and train operators when it comes to cybersecurity. You mentioned stakeholder engagement being part of your job, Anaïs. Just tell us a bit more. Do you find that these cybersecurity risks, particularly for legacy equipment, are being taken more seriously? And are you finding it that you're asking for more investment or more help from your stakeholders, from Infrabel's owner, which is the state? Tell us a bit more about that side of your work.
Yeah, if we're looking at external stakeholders such as the state, indeed, it is our investor because we are a public company. And I think the main thing we are asking is for money, if I can put it that way, because replacing old system or putting additional measures, protective measures on legacy systems is money. Also adapting or changing processes we have internally takes time and thus money. All way to make this possible or to justify those costs is by using or by explaining the NIS law to the state. That's one first thing. And then, of course, because of the NIS law, we can then put it in the strategy of Infrabel next to safety, and thus prioritize actions that have to do with cybersecurity. This way, different departments can work together. For example, we have the human resource department that can help us with training, the communication department that can help us with articles for employees, and so on.
Yeah, and you you've obviously got some huge investment coming in Belgium in terms of a national ERTMS resignaling program. Have you found in your time with Infrabel that cybersecurity is a more discussed topic within the business, and is it coming up your list of kind of potential risks and things to be aware of?
Yes, it is right. Internally and externally, again, internally we can see it with the resources. So our team is expanding, and we have a multidisciplinary team with different profiles. And we're also doing, for example, a lot of phishing campaigns. So our team is now inside. Now outside, we try indeed to participate to different panels to discuss also with ministers, because now indeed cybersecurity has to do with a lot of different subjects. We cannot be taken apart.
Yeah, there are elements, I guess, of the risk, the cyber threats that we face that are perhaps common to other industries as well, like energy and utilities. It's not just railways that are perhaps vulnerable to some of these risks. Thank you, George. I'll come to you, but tell us a little bit about the relationship between Rockrail as a leasing company and some of the operators that run your fleets. I mean, are you having more discussions about cybersecurity and cyber risks and best practice in this field with your operators, even though, as you said a moment ago, your fleets are pretty new by railway standards?
Absolutely, we are. And I think it's interesting. So as a rolling stock leasing company, we're buying new trains. So we have a strong relationship with the train manufacturer, and we have a strong relationship with the operator and end user. So partly, our role is to aid as much as possible the communication between those parties, because when they need ultimately a shared understanding of the cybersecurity risks, and one hand needs to know what the other hand is doing. And so what we have been involved with across all of the fleets we've been operating in is a kind of multi-party discussion to really, it begins, I think a couple of words, well, the word culture has already been said. It begins with establishing a culture where there is an appetite to really understand these risks and surface them so that they can be dealt with. Then it is actually to go through that risk assessment, and then it is to actually make sure that there are formalized processes in place to deal with the risks that arise. So I have to say it's been absolutely fascinating going on that journey, and I think as Nicholas already alluded to, there's growing maturity here. So the advantage we have as Rockrail is we are sitting across multiple projects going through this at the same time. So we can be a conduit to sharing lessons and helping everyone get up that maturity curve as far as we're able to in our role as much as possible. And that's certainly what we've been endeavoring to do, because it's in everybody's interests.
Mm.
So it's, Nick, maybe if I might just say,
absolutely.
That's very interesting, George. And you said there's something very important I want to highlight there, that as much as before I was explaining and arguing that safety is not cybersecurity. Actually, this is a case where cybersecurity is like safety. So they need, as much as we have a safety culture in the railway, we need to have a cybersecurity culture in the railway in the same case. So everybody is responsible for the safety in the railway. Everybody is responsible for the cybersecurity in the railway. So it's not a discipline that can live and be successful in its own little corner.
Yeah, Nico, that's a good point. I wanted to pick you up on that, actually. You said, safety and security are not the same thing. Can you, in your presentation, can you just elaborate on exactly what you mean by that comment? I thought it was an interesting comment.
So in the context of the presentation, it was mostly the fact that you do the safety case for your system once, and then if nothing, if you don't touch a system, 30 years later, it's still safe. It will still behave the same. Cybersecurity is a very dynamic environment, and something that you might have deemed secure. First of all, 100% secure doesn't exist, so it's only it's a risk management, which is much more different from safety, because safety is mostly quantitative. I mean, you are putting numbers in front of a lot of things. It's much harder to do in cybersecurity. That's another difference, I guess. But yeah, your cybersecurity landscape and threats and risk will change over time, all the time. So you cannot. It's not something that you do once before you release the train and then it's secure for the next 20 years. It's on the rail. That's not how it works.
Yeah, thank you. That makes sense, and I think that's a very valid point. Something that has come through this discussion, the whole 40 minutes that we've been talking as well, is the timescales. So the cybersecurity kind of threat landscape is changing. Well, George, you mentioned your trains have been in traffic for 2 or 3 years, so at least every 2 or 3 years, and maybe more often. And then Anaïs, if we look at the Belgian railway infrastructure, we had an article in Railway Gazette last month by the CEO of Infrabel talking about the storm damage that you had in Belgium a year ago. The bridges that were damaged and structures damaged that are 150 plus years old. The difference in life cycle between your physical assets as an infrastructure manager and the digital life cycle is crazy. How do you manage that difference, Anaïs? And culturally as well, I know you're doing some work in Belgium around things like IoT. Well, most railways are looking at IoT sensors, for example. If you think that your bridge or your point machine or whatever is, you can predict a failure before it happens, that's going to be a big advantage for railways. But that technology is changing all the time, whereas the bridge itself could be there for 100 plus years. How do you manage that challenge?
Exactly. And we cannot always apply those new measures on every infrastructure or asset that we want, because they are so old, indeed. But we face different obstacles. I think it needs to be clear. We have those technical obstacles because our assets are spread all over Belgium. They're numerous, they're old. And first of all, we have that visibility problem because some are black boxes. So they were installed without control at the time, maybe a long time ago, as you say. So that's the first challenge. If we want to protect everything, first we have to know everything. Second of all, we will change processes, and that may also have an impact by adding or deleting as the asset. And we don't always know when we, for example, change an asset, what the impact will be. And that's problematic because, as we know, it needs to be available all the time. Another problem we face also is, even though we want to make a change, is that we are dependent on suppliers. So actually that means that we need a lot of coordination and discussions with suppliers before being able to make a change. What I want to say is that, first of all, we try to protect as much as possible our legacy systems before changing them, because we know they're numerous, they're old, we cannot always change them. And this decision will be based on risks. So first of all, we have to know the situation. As you say, we know there is some risk implied with some assets or some systems. First, we have to know that. After, of course, knowing all the systems. I know I'm repeating myself, but it's important to say. And then also it's a cost-driven decision, right? So once we know the risk, we can prioritize, and then we can make cost decisions that will say that first we will try to have additional measures such as segregation, which was mentioned by Nicholas, and then we'll try other additional measures, of course, like network access control. If that's not possible, then only at that time we will add we will replace, the systems, and then we will look, which is an opportunity maybe for a new supplier that is compliant and has compliant products on the one hand, and on the second hand, then we'll also do security by design. So from the build to the run, we put security measures in every stage of the development. I hope I answered your question with that.
I think so, yeah. No, that made a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you. That's a very comprehensive answer. Thank you. I'm going to turn now to our audience, a couple of questions that we've had in. I'm going to come to George first and then perhaps to Nico afterwards. We've had a question from a mechanical engineer with Indian Railways asking about automatic train operation, which many railways around the world are looking at, not least because we all know the staff recruitment and retention crisis that many railways are facing around the world. In an ATO world, though, we could be automating legacy rolling stock, and that really is at the heart of this topic. How do we do so in a cyber secure way? I mean, George, I'm not perhaps talking specifically about any of your fleets by name, but I mean, in general, rolling stock leasing companies will be at the forefront of this digitalization boom. How do you see how do we overcome the cyber threat there?
Well, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because as Nico and others have already mentioned, safety and cybersecurity aren't the same, but they overlap. And what you've pulled out there is a key area where they overlap. So, my original background was developing railway systems and software from a safety perspective, and there are certain rules around the architecture of safety critical software, which software controlling train automation would by definition be, to do with keeping them separate and diverse, and using redundancy. So there are certain principles around the design which can't be compromised, and the same thing, there are constraints around the architecture of networks which need to be respected as well. So I think if legacy, answering off the top of my head, if legacy rolling stock was trying to evolve for new functionality like automation, I think the place to start is a principled view of the design to really understand where the challenges are. So actually applying the principles from first principles, where are the weaknesses and where are the strengths in the design, and can they be overcome in a way which leaves both the safety and cybersecurity assurance as a manageable task? Because if they can't, then it kind of means that can't be implemented.
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing, certainly in Europe, we're seeing just the first signs of quite serious trials of, certainly in France and in kind of freight yard shunting locomotives in Germany that are being automated, and these are all legacy vehicles. So, and I'm sure it's happening elsewhere in the world as well. So this is an emerging trend, and I think, as you say, George, if you're creating huge amounts of extra work on the cybersecurity front for your business, that's got to be factored into the business case, right?
Yeah, well, not just cybersecurity, but also if you are potentially invalidating the safety case. And I wouldn't say I take issue with Nico's comment that the safety case you just leave on the shelf, and I know that was said to make a point of difference. But from a slightly different perspective, the safety case, of course, evolves as well, as does the cybersecurity case, just perhaps on slightly different timescales. So they're both tricky issues. They both need to be managed as discrete things, and they both now need to be managed as an integrated whole. And actually, you can make systems over complex. And I think one of the areas where we probably will get to, hopefully over the sort of next generation, is working out where it is really sensible to leave things simple, so that we don't create a burden of and shift the work to a different place, which is actually removing all of the efficiencies we think we get by bundling in all sorts of additional functionality. But
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think that's what I was trying to get to. Yeah, that's exactly the point that I was trying to make. Yeah, thank you, George. Nicola, do you want to comment on that same subject?
Yes, yeah, George. No offense intended. Indeed, a safety case evolves over time, and you need to be able to manage that. But yeah, the timescales involved are not the same, and the costs also that it implies are not the same. So that's clear. But to come back to how to when you automate a legacy fleet, I mean, usually you will retrofit a new control command system to start with. So as George was saying, I mean, the question is that new control command system you're putting in place to do the automation, has it been designed with security in mind? And at the moment, a lot of the industry is busy trying to implement the secure development lifecycle from the 62443 into the design of those systems, and it's not an easy thing to do. But my guess is that in the future, any new system will have to have a security level, as in 62443 security level associated to those kind of systems. And I think that number, I will leave it for people's imagination to decide, but it's not really it's not standardized.
If I may add something, you mentioned it, that we don't have a clear answer to that because it's still a challenge. We cannot predict how it's going to evolve, but there are trials in other countries, and I think the most important thing is to do the knowledge sharing. So as soon as someone discovers something, we have to discuss it together, and that's the only way we can, I think, we can evolve in that discussion.
Yeah, although is cybersecurity a kind of topic? I mean, we've done a number of broadcasts on the subject ourselves as Railway Gazette, but is it a subject that people in the rail sector are willing to openly discuss? I mean, it's not an easy topic, is it, to necessarily say, our experience is X as a company.
Right.
It's not an easy thing to admit to, certainly not in a public forum. Just a couple of other questions or comments that have come in from the audience. We've had a comment from TUV Rhineland in Germany just saying, the key is not the key with legacy assets and legacy equipment to keep them as far away from the kind of open data networks as we can. But will that be, what does the panel think? Is that going to be possible as we move towards a world where, for example, we have much more connectivity, much more 5G, for example? We're looking at the future railway mobile communication system emerging in certainly in Europe and probably elsewhere. Nico, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, so if we first take a look at it from a legacy system point of view, I think that was specifically, so let's not touch the new systems. I mean, it's a good principle, and that's a principle that should be followed. But then again, we live in a real world, so it's hard to apply in practice. I mean, you will find that trains, each new IoT-based kind of system that has been added to a train has its own internet connection. Then people have been bridging networks without telling anybody, and you find all sorts of funny things out there. So I mean, it's a great principle, and absolutely we should do that. But you will find that in practice, especially legacy systems, people think it's air gap and all of that, but it's not. Just because it's been there for 10 years, 20 years, and things happen,
Okay. Any other comments from the panel on that question?
Well, there's something for me here about the market makes what the customer wants to a certain extent, and partly you mentioned the sort of cultural difficulties of talking about cybersecurity issues. I think it's also an area where there's a huge competence gap, and people need to acknowledge what they don't understand about it, given its increasing importance, and to fill in that gap. And that's people at all parts of the process. So I do think there is a tendency to overcomplicate some rail assets almost for the sake of it. But until customers are differentiating between different solutions and are wise enough to pick the solutions that are actually going to be the best for whole life costs, then there won't be any incentive for people to do things differently.
Yeah, certainly the rail industry can on occasion be accused of being over complex. Perhaps I think that's probably a consensus that many people in the sector would agree on. And perhaps Nico, just come to you with a final comment from the audience. I mean, are you seeing any specific trends in the development of cyber attacks and cyber threats? I mean, is it phishing? Is it kind of human first threats? Because we know I guess that in some cybersecurity incidents, can be caused by ex-employees or whatever. Or is there a trend? Are there particular trends in the threat, in the nature of the threat emerging?
So thanks, Nick. Great question and many answers to that. Let me think about which angle I should start with. So I think I will first bounce on Anaïs' comment before. So it's very important indeed that we build a culture of sharing. Because in cybersecurity, we have to be sharing what the offensive guys are doing, so the defensive guy can actually react. And we are not very mature as an industry, so I'm really looking forward to us developing there, because there is, for example, there is an ISAC that exists for the railway, but it's not very active if you compare that to some other transportation domain. In the aviation domain, they have one which is very active. Energy is years ahead of us. So we really have to catch up on that topic, and it's very important to understand the threat landscape indeed, because without information, we're all in the dark. So that's really not good. In terms of the threats, I mean, there's been some interesting development actually even this year. I mean, as we all know, with the situation in Ukraine, actually at the beginning of the war in March, I believe, for the first time, we had hacktivists who actually attacked the Belarusian railways to disrupt the Russian moving around their troops. And this was really a first, where we had actually hacktivists being also a potential threat actor. So people who might not be happy with your country behavior, might have just even some of your disgruntled citizens actually attacking the system. So that was a very new thing. And during that event also, we learned quite a few things. So I don't like saying this, but thankfully we haven't had or sandworm, in railways. So concretely, there's not been one example where people have died or trains have crashed that which could shock the industry into moving faster into that direction. And I hope we don't never ever get that. But that's one of the main difference you have between us, for example, railways and the energy. So they've been set in motion much earlier on, and they had really bad things happening to them. So we are lagging a bit behind in all of this, but now that the regulation, again, we are very much driven by regulation. So being the NIS2 directive, which is putting more pressure on the end users to deal with that topic. In the US, at the moment, it's heating up like crazy. There's a lot of stuff coming out of the US, which are concrete and demand that they do things. So the market is being really stimulated by that at the moment. So it's evolving fast. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you, Nico, for those comments. We've had a flurry of questions late in the broadcast, and I don't think, unfortunately, I've got time to come to everyone in the audience who's posed a question. So my apologies to you if we don't get to your question. We're almost up in our hour-long discussion, but again, thank you for everyone's interaction. So I'm just going to ask each of our panelists to just give a concluding remark, really, and perhaps just give one takeaway on perhaps how railways or infrastructure managers, what is the one perhaps key lesson they can take away from this when they think about protecting their legacy assets in a cybersecurity context? George, do you want to start? You give us a concluding thought.
Well, I think the others have stolen my thunder in terms of culture, so I would go another. I'm an engineer, so it takes me a long time to realise how important people are. But the other aspect is competence, and a great place to start is to build competence. So you've got somebody who, internal to the organization, who understands this topic and this domain, and then you've got something to build on, because you can have all the flashy systems in the world and all of the technology, but if you haven't got the people capability, it won't matter anyway. And if you have the people capability without some of the flashy systems, then you'll still get some value from it. So I would say everyone should be building competence now, because that's where the biggest gap is, as well as the cultural one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the question of people and people who understand the railway domain, people who understand the IT and cybersecurity domain, and having both within your organisation, absolutely critical. Anaïs, a concluding remark from you, perhaps from the perspective of an infrastructure manager?
Yes, thank you. Well, George talked about the competences. So I would just say to add to that it's important to make risk-based decisions and cost-based decisions. Well, that is what a a company would usually do, but I think we have to put the accent on the risks and that they have to be known by all the persons involved in this. And then also that we can use the TS reference to evaluate ourselves. Actually, maybe we're not there yet. We're not there yet for sure, but at least we know where we're going. And I think that's the most important.
Brilliant, thank you. And Nicolas, concluding thought from you for our audience to take away?
Sure. So I think I'll go back to George's point. I think it's very important that we get the people, who are able to deal with the topic, because everything starts with people and finish with people, So it's the strongest asset, but the weakest link as well. But so we need the people, and we should really not forget that standards have evolved over the last few years a lot. And as Anaïs was saying, the TS 57.1 is quite hands-on. It gives very good guidance on what should be done, be it for new system or legacy systems. So I think there's a lot of value in that. And on the technical countermeasures, there's a lot of things that can be done which are quick win and bring enormous value for actually a very little effort. So people should not be scared with a task and should get going. And basically visibility, knowing your system and being able to see what's happening, I guess, is really the first step there towards a more secure railway for legacy system particularly.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, that's a nice upbeat note to finish this discussion on. So I'd like to thank our three panelists very much for their contribution, and Silas for its sponsorship of this live broadcast. And most of all, I'd like to thank you, all of our viewers, for your participation. Just a reminder that you'll be able to watch the recorded on-demand version of this broadcast online at railwaygazette.com within the next 24 hours. And obviously, as a registered viewer, you'll be notified when the recorded version is ready to watch in case you've missed any of this afternoon's debate. The live feed and question zone will still be open for a few more minutes. So if you've got any further comments or feedback to the panelists you'd like to drop into the feed, please do so. We'd welcome all your feedback, of course. And that's it, really. So all our previous interactive live broadcasts, of which there are a couple more on cybersecurity, they're all available to watch at railwaygazette.com. But all that remains for me is to wish you all a very good afternoon. Thank you for watching. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you very much, and goodbye.